She thought she was untouchable, a wealthy heiress who could casually dismiss an entire race with a single careless sentence over dinner wine. But Charlotte Hale had no idea that the one man who would shatter her privileged world was standing in the shadows, hearing every cruel word that slipped from her lips. Marcus Reed, the dignified facility supervisor she'd unknowingly humiliated, was about to become the center of her universe, forcing her to confront the ugliest parts of herself while awakening feelings she never saw coming. What started as a professional relationship would spiral into something that would either destroy everything she'd ever known or transform her into a woman worthy of real love. But when family pressure mounts and society's judgment threatens to tear them apart, will Charlotte choose the safety of her gilded cage or risk everything for a love that could redeem her soul? If you're watching this incredible story of second chances and forbidden love, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know if love like this exists in your corner of the world. The crystal chandelier cast warm light across the dining room as Charlotte Hale smoothed her navy dress and checked her watch. 7:30. Perfect timing. The charity planning committee would arrive soon, and everything had to be just right. She walked through the grand foyer of the Hale estate, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The house had been in her family for 3 generations. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every carefully arranged flower spoke of old money and careful breeding. Charlotte took comfort in the familiar surroundings. "Miss Charlotte?" Rosa appeared from the kitchen, carrying a silver tray. "The wine is ready, and I've set out the appetizers in the dining room." "Thank you, Rosa." Charlotte smiled at the estate manager. Rosa had worked for the family for 15 years, keeping everything running smoothly. "You can head home after you let the caterers out. I'll handle the rest." Rosa nodded and disappeared back toward the kitchen. Charlotte heard car doors closing outside. The committee members were arriving. Within minutes, her dining room filled with familiar voices. These were the same women Charlotte had known since childhood. They planned charity events, attended the same church, and moved in the same social circles. Everything was predictable and safe. "Charlotte, darling, this salmon is divine," said Margaret Thornton, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "You simply must give me the recipe. I'll have Rosa write it down for you." Charlotte refilled Margaret's wineglass and settled back into her chair. The conversation flowed easily. They discussed the upcoming hospital fundraiser, debated flower arrangements, and gossiped about mutual friends. Charlotte felt relaxed for the first time all week. "Speaking of flowers," said Linda Matthews, "did you see that gorgeous arrangement Tom sent Rebecca? 24 white roses. So romantic." "Oh, that reminds me." Margaret turned to Charlotte with a mischievous smile. "When are you going to put poor Daniel out of his misery? The man has been circling you like a devoted puppy for months." Charlotte laughed and shook her head. "Daniel's a good friend. Nothing more." "Come now," Linda joined in. "You two would make such a lovely couple, both from good families, both involved in the community. It's perfect." "Perfect on paper doesn't mean perfect in real life," Charlotte said, taking a sip of wine. "Well then, what's your type?" Margaret leaned forward with interest. "Tall, dark, and handsome?" "I suppose?" Charlotte shrugged. "Just not too dark." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The room went quiet for a moment, then Margaret let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, Charlotte, you're terrible." But Linda's smile looked forced. "What do you mean by that?" Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. "I just mean, I have preferences. I don't date black men. It's nothing personal. Just my preference." The silence stretched longer this time. Margaret cleared her throat and reached for her wineglass. Linda looked down at her plate. Well, Margaret said finally, we all have our preferences, I suppose. The conversation moved on to safer topics, but Charlotte noticed the energy had shifted. She tried to focus on planning the fundraiser, but her mind kept returning to that moment of awkward silence. From the corner of her eye, she saw a figure in the doorway leading to the kitchen. A tall man in dark slacks and a white button-down shirt stood there, holding a manila folder. He must be the new facilities supervisor her mother had mentioned. Charlotte's stomach dropped. How long had he been standing there? Had he heard what she'd said? The man stepped into the room, his expression professional and neutral. Excuse me, ladies. I'm Marcus Reed. I have some documents for Mrs. Hale. His voice was deep and calm. Charlotte noticed his posture. Straight, but not stiff. Confident without being aggressive. He was probably in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and careful movements. Of course! Charlotte stood up, her heart beating faster. My mother's in her study upstairs. I can take those for her. Marcus handed her the folder. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Charlotte felt a strange jolt of awareness. His hands were strong and warm, with neat, short nails. Thank you, Miss Hale. His eyes met hers for just a moment. There was no anger there, no accusation, just a professional distance that somehow felt worse than anger would have. You're welcome, she managed. Marcus nodded to the other women. Ladies, enjoy your evening. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Charlotte watched him go, noting the quiet dignity in his movements. He carried himself like a man who had nothing to prove, but also nothing to apologize for. The front door opened and closed a moment later. Through the window, Charlotte could see him walking to a dark blue pickup truck parked in the circular driveway. Who was that? Linda asked, craning her neck to see out the window. The new facilities supervisor, Charlotte said, still holding the folder. Mother hired him last week. He seems nice enough, Margaret said carefully. Charlotte nodded, but she couldn't stop thinking about the look in Marcus's eyes. He'd heard her. She was sure of it. And now he knew exactly what kind of person she was. The evening ended earlier than usual. The committee members made their excuses and left by 9 o'clock. Charlotte found herself alone in the dining room, staring at the half-empty wine glasses and scattered papers. Rosa appeared to help clear the table. How did the planning go? Fine, Charlotte said. Rosa, what do you know about the new supervisor? Rosa paused in collecting plates. Mr. Reed? He seems very professional. Your mother was impressed with his references. He managed facilities for a hotel chain before this. Is he married? I don't think so. He has a younger brother he's raising. The boy is in high school. Rosa studied Charlotte's face. Why do you ask? Just curious. Charlotte handed Rosa the folder Marcus had brought. He left this for Mother. Rosa took the folder and continued clearing the table, but Charlotte caught the older woman's thoughtful expression. Later that night, Charlotte sat in her bedroom, replaying the evening over and over. She tried to convince herself that Marcus might not have heard her comment. Maybe he'd just arrived at the doorway. Maybe he'd been focused on the documents, but deep down, she knew better. He'd heard every word. She thought about calling Linda or Margaret to explain what she'd meant. But explain what, exactly? That she wasn't prejudiced? Just selective? That sounded even worse. Charlotte had never really thought about her dating preferences before. She'd grown up in a world where everyone looked like her, thought like her, lived like her. Her social circle was small and insular. She dated men her parents approved of, men who fit into her world without question. She'd never meant to hurt anyone. The comment had just slipped out, the kind of thoughtless remark people made in familiar company. But now, Thinking about the quiet dignity in Marcus Reed's eyes, she felt ashamed. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, thinking about calling Daniel. They were supposed to have dinner this weekend. Daniel Brooks had been pursuing her gently but persistently for months. He was everything her parents wanted in a son-in-law. Successful, well-connected, from a good family. But Charlotte found herself thinking instead about Marcus Reed, about the way he'd carried himself, the respectful way he'd addressed the room, the brief warmth she'd felt when their hands touched. She set her phone aside and turned off the light. Tomorrow, she would act like nothing had happened. She would be professional and polite. With luck, Marcus would forget the whole thing, and they could maintain a cordial working relationship. But as she closed her eyes, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted tonight. Something she couldn't take back or pretend away. In his small apartment across town, Marcus Reed sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the next day's work schedule. The Hale estate was a good job, steady pay, reasonable hours, and benefits that would help him take care of Caleb. His younger brother was in his room, supposedly doing homework, but probably playing video games. Marcus could hear the faint sound of music through the thin walls. He thought about Charlotte Hale's words, spoken so casually, with such easy confidence. "I don't date black men." Like she was talking about preferring tea over coffee. Marcus had heard worse. Much worse. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood where insults were shouted, not whispered over wine glasses. But somehow, Charlotte's casual dismissal stung more than open hostility would have. Maybe because she seemed so surprised to see him there. Maybe because he'd caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Not malice, but a kind of thoughtless privilege that was somehow more painful. Marcus closed the work folder and rubbed his temples. He needed this job. Caleb was counting on him, and good positions like this didn't come along often. He couldn't let his personal feelings interfere with providing for his brother. He would be professional, polite, distant, and he would remember exactly who Charlotte Hale was. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Charlotte woke early and dressed carefully in dark jeans and a cream sweater. She wanted to look professional, but not overdressed for a day of walking through the estate's various properties. She found her mother in the breakfast room, reading the newspaper over coffee and toast. "Good morning, dear." Evelyn Hale looked up with a smile. "How did the planning session go?" "Very well. We finalized the menu and the entertainment." Charlotte poured herself coffee from the silver pot on the sideboard. "The new supervisor brought some documents by last night." "Yes, I saw them on my desk. Marcus is very thorough." Evelyn folded her newspaper neatly. "I'm glad I hired him. The estate needs someone reliable." "What will his duties involve?" "Everything, really. Maintenance oversight, security coordination, managing the grounds crew. Your father always handled those things himself." "But—" Evelyn's voice trailed off. Charlotte's father had died 2 years ago, leaving behind a complicated web of properties and investments. Charlotte helped with some of the social obligations, but she'd never been involved in the practical side of running the estate. "Actually," Evelyn continued, "I'm planning to have Marcus take over management of the downtown property as well. The building your father left us needs a lot of attention, and I think Marcus has the experience to handle it." Charlotte set down her coffee cup. "The downtown property?" "Yes, it's been sitting vacant since your father passed. I keep meaning to do something with it, but I haven't had the time or expertise. Marcus seems capable of evaluating what needs to be done. I'd like to be involved in that project." Evelyn looked surprised. "Really? It's not very glamorous work, dear. Mostly inspections and repair estimates." "I want to learn more about Father's investments," Charlotte said. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. "I should understand the family business better." "Well, if you're sure." You can discuss it with Marcus when he arrives this morning. Charlotte nodded and tried to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. She would be professional. She would prove that last night's comment hadn't meant anything. An hour later, she watched from the front window as Marcus's blue pickup truck pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing work boots, dark jeans, and a navy jacket. Charlotte waited a few minutes before walking outside to meet him. She found him near the garage, talking with the grounds crew about winterizing the gardens. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said as the other men dispersed to their tasks. Marcus turned to face her. "Good morning, Miss Hale." His tone was polite but cool. Charlotte felt the distance immediately. "I wanted to thank you for bringing those documents by last night, and to apologize if our dinner meeting interrupted your evening." "No problem at all." Marcus adjusted the briefcase strap on his shoulder. "Is there something you need today?" His formal tone made Charlotte's chest tighten. She'd hoped for some sign that he was willing to move past last night's awkwardness. "Actually, yes. Mother mentioned the downtown property project. I'd like to be involved." Marcus studied her face for a moment. "Are you sure? It's going to be a lot of walking around an old building, taking notes, getting dirty." "I'm sure." "All right then, we can start this afternoon if that works for you." "Perfect." Marcus nodded and started walking toward the main house. Charlotte fell into step beside him, trying to think of something to say that might break through his professional distance. "How are you settling in?" she asked. "Is the job what you expected?" "It's fine." "And your brother?" "Rosa mentioned you're raising him." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Hale, I appreciate your interest, but I think it's best if we keep our interactions focused on work. Professional boundaries, you understand?" The words stung, even though Charlotte knew she probably deserved them. "Of course. I didn't mean to pry." "No harm done." Marcus resumed walking. "I'll pick you up at 1 o'clock for the downtown inspection." Charlotte watched him enter the house through the kitchen door. She stood alone in the driveway, feeling foolish and strangely hurt. This was going to be more difficult than she'd thought. The downtown property sat on a corner lot, surrounded by newer office buildings and trendy restaurants. Charlotte had driven past it countless times, but never really looked at it. Now, standing beside Marcus's truck, she could see why her mother had been avoiding the project. The 3-story brick building looked tired. Paint peeled from the window frames, and several windows on the upper floors were boarded up. Weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalk. "It's not as bad as it looks," Marcus said, pulling a keyring from his jacket pocket. "The bones are solid. Your father kept up with the major systems." Charlotte nodded, though she had no idea what he meant by major systems. She followed him to the front entrance, noting how he tested the door handle before inserting the key. Inside, the building smelled of dust and stale air. Their footsteps echoed in the empty lobby. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating floating dust particles. "The first floor was retail space," Marcus explained, consulting a folder from his briefcase. "The upper floors were offices. According to the records, the last tenants moved out about 6 months before your father passed away." Charlotte looked around the empty space, trying to imagine it filled with people and activity. "What do you think it could be used for now?" "Depends on your goals. The location is good for retail or restaurants on the ground floor. The upper floors could be converted to apartments or kept as office space." Marcus walked to the back of the building and tested a door that led to a stairwell. "But first, we need to assess what kind of repairs are needed." They spent the next hour walking through every room. Marcus took detailed notes, photographing problem areas and explaining issues Charlotte would never have noticed. A water stain on one ceiling indicated roof problems. Outdated electrical panels would need replacing. The heating system was 20 years old. You really know what you're looking for, Charlotte said, as Marcus examined a window frame that looked perfectly fine to her. You learn to spot problems before they become disasters. He pointed to a small gap where the frame met the wall. See this? Water's been getting in. If it's not fixed soon, you'll have rot in the wall studs. Charlotte found herself genuinely interested in his explanations. Marcus clearly took pride in his work, and his knowledge impressed her. She began to relax slightly as they focused on the building's practical needs. On the second floor, they encountered their first real problem. A pipe had burst sometime in the past, flooding a corner office and damaging the flooring below. This is going to be expensive, Marcus said, kneeling to examine the warped floorboards. Charlotte knelt beside him, noting how he carefully tested each board to see how far the damage extended. His hands moved with practiced confidence, and she found herself watching the way he worked rather than listening to his explanation. Miss Hale? Charlotte realized Marcus had asked her a question. I'm sorry, what? I asked if you wanted to prioritize cosmetic fixes or structural repairs. Heat rose in her cheeks. Structural, I suppose. Safety first. Marcus gave her a look that might have been amusement, but his expression remained professional. Good choice. They continued working their way through the building. By the time they reached the third floor, Charlotte felt hot and dusty. Her cream sweater was streaked with dirt, and her hands were grimy from touching walls and door frames. There's a bathroom down the hall if you want to wash up, Marcus offered, noticing her looking at her hands. Thank you. Charlotte found the small bathroom and examined herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. Her hair had come loose from its neat ponytail, and she had a smudge of something dark across her cheek. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had attended last night's dinner party. But strangely, she felt more energetic than she had in weeks. When she returned, Marcus was standing at a large window, looking out at the street below. The late afternoon light caught the angles of his face, and Charlotte felt that same unexpected jolt of awareness she'd experienced when their hands touched. The view's not bad from up here, she said, joining him at the window. No, it's not. Marcus didn't look at her, but his voice was less formal than it had been all day. This could be a nice space with some work? What would you do with it? If it were yours, I mean. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Mixed use, probably. Retail or restaurant on the ground floor, small apartments upstairs. Young professionals would love a place like this. Close to downtown, character building, reasonable rent. Charlotte could hear the enthusiasm in his voice, carefully controlled but genuine. You've thought about this before. I think about a lot of things. Marcus stepped back from the window. We should head back. I want to get these notes organized while they're fresh. The drive back to the estate was quiet. Charlotte found herself stealing glances at Marcus as he drove. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, and he navigated traffic with calm patience. She wondered what he was thinking about. Thank you for today, she said as they pulled into the estate's driveway. I learned a lot. You're welcome. Marcus parked near the main house and gathered his briefcase. I'll have a preliminary report ready by tomorrow afternoon. Charlotte got out of the truck and brushed dust from her jeans. I'd like to continue being involved in the project, if that's all right. Marcus paused with his hand on the door handle. Are you sure? This was just the easy part. The real work starts now. I'm sure. He studied her for a moment, and Charlotte thought she saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but maybe a lessening of that careful distance. All right then, I'll see you tomorrow. Charlotte watched him drive away, then walked slowly into the house. She found her mother in the sitting room, reading. How did the inspection go? Evelyn asked, looking up from her book. Very well. The building needs work, but Marcus thinks it has good potential. Charlotte settled into the chair across from her mother. I'm going to stay involved with the project. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Really? What brought this on? I want to understand more about Father's investments, and I enjoyed the work today. I see. Evelyn marked her place in the book and set it aside. Charlotte, dear, I hope you're not developing any inappropriate feelings about our employee. The words hit Charlotte like cold water. What do you mean? I mean that Marcus is a nice man, and I'm sure he's very good at his job. But he's staff, darling. It's important to maintain proper boundaries. Charlotte felt her face flush. Mother, I'm interested in learning about the business. Nothing more. Of course. I just thought I should mention it. Evelyn picked up her book again. Oh, and Daniel called while you were out. He confirmed dinner for Saturday night. Charlotte had completely forgotten about her date with Daniel. Right, Saturday. He sounded excited. I think he may have something special planned. Charlotte nodded and excused herself, claiming she needed to clean up. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, her thoughts weren't on Daniel Brooks and his special plans. Instead, she found herself thinking about Marcus Reed's hands as he tested those floorboards, and the way his voice had warmed when he talked about converting the building. The next morning brought a problem that required both Charlotte and Marcus to visit the property again. A neighbor had called to report water flowing from under the building's back door. Charlotte arrived to find Marcus already there, knee-deep in the basement with a flashlight and a wrench. How bad is it? She called down the stairs. Could be worse. His voice echoed from below. Looks like an old pipe finally gave up, but it's been leaking for a while. Charlotte made her way carefully down the narrow stairs. The basement was dark and damp, with exposed brick walls and a concrete floor. Marcus was working near an ancient-looking boiler, water pooling around his boots. Can you hand me that bucket? He asked, pointing to a metal pail near the stairs. Charlotte picked up the bucket and waded through the shallow water to reach him. Marcus had removed his jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves. She could see the muscles in his forearms as he worked to tighten a fitting. There, he said finally, testing the connection. That should hold until we can get a plumber out here. He straightened and accepted the bucket from Charlotte, their fingers brushing again in the dim light. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. Charlotte realized they were standing very close in the confined space. She could smell his cologne mixed with honest sweat from his work. Her heart began beating faster. Charlotte? Marcus's voice was different now, softer. Yes? About what you said the other night. Charlotte's stomach dropped. She'd been hoping he would never bring it up. Marcus, I'm not looking for an apology, he said. I just want you to know that I heard you, and I understand where you stand. The words were gentle, but they cut deep. Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. You don't understand, she whispered. I never meant to hurt anyone. Intent and impact aren't always the same thing, Marcus said. But his tone wasn't harsh. If anything, he sounded tired. They stood in the dim basement, water lapping at their feet, and Charlotte felt the weight of her careless words pressing down on her. She wanted to explain, to defend herself, to make him understand that she wasn't the person he thought she was. But maybe she was exactly that person. Maybe her comfortable life had insulated her from the impact of her casual prejudices. I should go, she said finally. Marcus nodded and stepped back to give her room to pass. I'll handle the plumber. You don't need to come back down here. Charlotte climbed the stairs on unsteady legs. Outside, she sat in her car for several minutes, trying to compose herself. Through the building's windows, she could see Marcus moving around inside, continuing his work as if their conversation had never happened. That evening, Charlotte found herself unable to concentrate on anything. She tried reading, but the words blurred together. She attempted to return phone calls, but couldn't focus on the conversations. Finally, she drove to the small park where she sometimes went to think. It was nearly empty in the fading light, just a few joggers and a woman walking her dog. Charlotte sat on a bench and tried to examine her feelings honestly. When had she started finding Marcus attractive? Was it when she'd seen his competence at the building? When she'd watched him work with those careful, skilled hands? Or had it started earlier, in that moment, when he'd handed her the documents and she'd felt that unexpected spark of connection? The realization that her mother might be right about inappropriate feelings made Charlotte's stomach clench. Was she developing feelings for Marcus precisely because he was forbidden? Was this some kind of rebellion against her mother's expectations? Or was she attracted to him simply because he was a good man? Because he carried himself with quiet dignity, worked with honest pride, and treated everyone with respect despite what he'd overheard? Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Looking forward to Saturday. Made reservations at Le Bernardin. She stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Sounds lovely. But even as she sent the reply, Charlotte knew she wasn't looking forward to Saturday at all. The next few days passed in a careful dance of professional politeness. Marcus continued working on the building assessment, and Charlotte found excuses to be involved. But their interactions remained formal and distant. On Friday afternoon, Charlotte arrived at the property to find Marcus's truck in the parking area, but no sign of Marcus himself. She let herself into the building and called out. Up here, came his voice from the second floor. Charlotte climbed the stairs and found Marcus in the corner office where they'd discovered the water damage. But he wasn't alone. A teenage boy sat on a makeshift table, swinging his legs and eating a sandwich. Charlotte, this is my brother Caleb, Marcus said. Caleb, Miss Hale. Caleb hopped down from the table and extended his hand with a grin. Nice to meet you, Miss Hale. Marcus talks about you. He does? Charlotte shook the boy's hand, noting his warm smile and easy confidence. All business stuff, Marcus said quickly, shooting his brother a warning look. Caleb's school had a half day. He's waiting for me to finish up here. Charlotte studied the boy, seeing the family resemblance in his eyes and the shape of his face. But where Marcus was reserved and careful, Caleb radiated openness and energy. What grade are you in? She asked. Junior year. I'm looking at colleges for next year. Caleb's pride was obvious. Marcus says if I keep my grades up, I might get some scholarship help. That's wonderful. Yeah, Marcus has been on me about studying since forever, but it's paying off. Caleb looked at his brother with obvious affection. He's the best. Charlotte saw Marcus shift uncomfortably, but she also caught the flash of pride in his eyes. I should let you get back to work, Charlotte said. It was nice meeting you, Caleb. You too, Miss Hale. As Charlotte turned to leave, she heard Caleb say to his brother, She's pretty, and she seems nice. Caleb, Marcus warned. What? I'm just saying. Charlotte hurried down the stairs, her cheeks burning. She sat in her car for a few minutes, thinking about the easy affection between the two brothers and the way Caleb had looked at Marcus with such obvious respect and love. Marcus Reed wasn't just a facility supervisor. He was someone's whole world. He was raising his teenage brother, helping him plan for college, working hard to give the boy opportunities and stability. The weight of her casual dismissal of him felt heavier than ever. Saturday evening arrived, and with it, her dinner date with Daniel Brooks. Charlotte dressed carefully in a black cocktail dress and pearls, trying to summon enthusiasm for the evening ahead. Daniel picked her up precisely on time, looking handsome and confident in his expensive suit. He held her car door, complimented her appearance, and made pleasant conversation during the drive to the restaurant. Le Bernardin was elegant and hushed, the kind of place where conversations were conducted in low voices, and every detail was perfect. Daniel had secured a prime table, and the waitstaff treated them with the deference reserved for regular, generous customers. "You look beautiful tonight," Daniel said, raising his wine glass. "Thank you." Charlotte smiled and touched her glass to his. Daniel launched into stories about his law practice, dropping names and discussing cases that had been covered in the local newspaper. He was intelligent and successful, everything a woman should want. But Charlotte found her mind wandering. She thought about Marcus kneeling in the flooded basement, patiently explaining water damage. She thought about Caleb's proud smile when he talked about college. "Charlotte?" Daniel was looking at her expectantly. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Daniel's smile flickered slightly. "I asked what you thought about the wine." "It's lovely." They ordered dinner, and Daniel continued talking. He told her about a recent golf game, a weekend trip to his family's cabin, plans for a vacation in Europe. "I was thinking," he said as their entrees arrived, "that you might like to join me for the Hendersons' anniversary party next weekend. It should be quite an event." "That sounds nice," Charlotte said automatically. Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Charlotte, I feel like we've been dancing around something for months now. I care about you, more than care about you." Charlotte looked down at their joined hands. Daniel's fingers were soft and manicured, unmarked by physical work. "Daniel, I know we haven't talked about the future, but I think we could have something really special together. We have so much in common. Our families, our backgrounds, our goals." Charlotte felt a familiar tightness in her chest. "We do have a lot in common. Then what's holding you back?" Daniel's thumb stroked across her knuckles. "I feel like part of you is always somewhere else." The words hit closer to home than Charlotte cared to admit. "I'm here." "Are you?" Charlotte looked around the elegant restaurant, at the other well-dressed couples sharing intimate dinners, at the world she'd always known and never questioned. "Yes," she said finally. "I'm here." But even as she spoke the words, Charlotte knew they weren't entirely true. Part of her was thinking about a flooded basement and skilled hands, and the way Marcus Reed had looked at her in the dim light below the building. Part of her was wondering what it would be like to choose something different from everything she'd always known. The following Monday morning brought unexpected news. Charlotte found her mother in the breakfast room, speaking quietly on the phone. When Evelyn hung up, her expression was troubled. "What's wrong?" Charlotte asked, pouring herself coffee. That was the insurance company. They're requiring a full structural inspection of the downtown property before they'll approve our renovation coverage. Evelyn rubbed her temples. "Apparently, the water damage is more extensive than we thought." Charlotte set down her cup. "How extensive?" "Extensive enough that we need to move quickly. If we don't start repairs within 30 days, they might drop our coverage altogether." "What does that mean for the project?" "It means Marcus will need to coordinate with structural engineers, contractors, and inspectors over the next few weeks. It's going to be intensive." Evelyn looked at her daughter carefully. "Are you still interested in being involved?" Charlotte thought about spending the next month working closely with Marcus, navigating the careful distance they'd maintained since their conversation in the basement. "Yes," she said. "I want to see it through." By noon, Charlotte found herself back at the downtown property, this time accompanied by a structural engineer named Tom Williams. Marcus had arrived early to prepare for the inspection, and Charlotte could see the stress in the tight line of his shoulders. "The good news," Tom said after an hour of examining support beams and foundation walls, "is that the building is structurally sound. The bad news is that water damage has compromised several floor joists, and you've got some electrical issues that need immediate attention." Marcus took notes while Tom explained the required repairs. Charlotte found herself watching Marcus's face, noting how he asked thoughtful questions and absorbed technical information with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. "What's the timeline?" Charlotte asked. "If you move fast, 6 to 8 weeks for the critical repairs. But you'll need to coordinate multiple contractors, and some of this work can't happen simultaneously." Tom handed Marcus a thick folder. "I've outlined the sequence in my report." After Tom left, Charlotte and Marcus stood alone in the empty building. The afternoon light slanted through the dusty windows, and Charlotte could hear traffic from the street outside. "This is going to be complicated," Marcus said, flipping through the engineer's report. "Can we manage it?" Marcus looked at her with surprise. "We?" Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, can you manage it? With my help, if you want it?" For the first time in days, Marcus's professional mask slipped slightly. "Why do you want to help?" The question hung in the air between them. Charlotte could give him the safe answer, that she wanted to learn about the family business, that she felt responsible for her father's investments. But standing there in the dusty light, she found herself wanting to be honest. "Because I care about this project," she said. "And because you're good at what you do. I want to learn from you." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not warmth, exactly, but a lessening of the careful distance he'd maintained. "It's going to mean long days and difficult decisions," he said. "Contractors can be unreliable, inspectors can be demanding, and nothing ever goes according to plan." "I can handle that." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "All right then. We'll need to start calling contractors tomorrow." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Charlotte with its intensity. Every morning, she met Marcus at the property to review progress and coordinate the day's work. Electricians arrived to rewire the building's outdated systems. Plumbers replaced corroded pipes. Carpenters rebuilt damaged floor joists. Charlotte found herself learning a new vocabulary of construction terms and building codes. She discovered she had a talent for managing schedules and keeping track of multiple moving parts. But more than that, she found herself genuinely engaged in the work. She also found herself spending more time with Marcus than she'd ever spent with any man, including Daniel. They shared coffee from a thermos in the early mornings, discussed problems over lunch from the deli down the street, and often worked past sunset to accommodate contractor schedules. The careful professional distance between them began to soften around the edges. Marcus still called her Miss Hale, but he started explaining things without her asking. Charlotte began offering her opinions about design choices and timing decisions. One afternoon, while waiting for a delayed contractor, they found themselves sitting on the front steps of the building, watching pedestrians hurry past in the autumn sunshine. "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte said. Marcus looked at her sideways. "Sure." "Why did you take this job? You could probably make more money managing facilities for a hotel chain or a large company." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Stability," he said finally. "Hotels go through managers quickly. Corporate jobs can disappear overnight. Your family has owned this estate for generations. I figured it was a good place to build something lasting. For Caleb? For Caleb. And for myself, I suppose." Marcus stretched his legs out in front of him. "I want him to see that good work gets recognized, that treating people with respect matters, that you don't have to choose between dignity and success. Charlotte heard the deeper meaning in his words. You've had to make that choice before. A few times. Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but Charlotte caught the edge underneath. Some employers want you grateful for the opportunity. They want you to smile and nod and never push back, even when they're wrong. What do you do in those situations? Find a better job. Charlotte smiled at his simple answer. Is that why you don't date much? Too busy taking care of Caleb and building your career? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marcus gave her a sharp look. Sorry, Charlotte said quickly. That's none of my business. It's all right. Marcus leaned back against the step behind him. But to answer your question, I don't date much because trust is complicated. What do you mean? I mean that when people look at me, they see different things. Some see someone who's safe, respectable, won't cause trouble. Others see someone who's interesting precisely because he's different from what they're used to. Marcus met her eyes directly. Both of those things make for lousy relationships. Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. What if someone just saw you? Not a category or a type, just you. Then that would be something worth paying attention to. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. Charlotte felt her heart speed up, aware that they'd ventured into dangerous territory. A truck pulled up to the curb, and the delayed contractor finally arrived. The moment dissolved as they returned to work, but Charlotte found herself replaying Marcus's words for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, Daniel called while Charlotte was reviewing contractor estimates in her bedroom. I feel like I haven't seen you in weeks, he said. How's the building project going? Very well, we're making good progress. And you're still enjoying playing supervisor? Something in his tone made Charlotte bristle. I'm not playing anything. I'm learning to manage a significant investment. Of course, I didn't mean to sound dismissive. Daniel's voice smoothed into his lawyer tone. I'm just surprised at how much time you're dedicating to it. It's important work. I'm sure it is, but don't you think you could hire someone to handle the day-to-day details? You shouldn't have to spend your time dealing with contractors and inspections. Charlotte gripped the phone tighter. What if I want to spend my time that way? Then I support you, obviously. I just hate to see you getting your hands dirty with manual labor when you could be focusing on the bigger picture. After they hung up, Charlotte stared at the contractor estimates scattered across her bedspread. Daniel's comment about getting her hands dirty echoed unpleasantly in her mind. Was that what this was about? Some kind of rebellion against her upbringing? A way to prove she could handle real work? Or was Daniel simply unable to imagine that she might find genuine satisfaction in solving practical problems and seeing tangible results from her efforts? Charlotte thought about the afternoon she'd spent helping Marcus coordinate 3 different contractors who all needed access to the same electrical panel. It had been stressful and demanding, requiring constant communication and creative problem-solving. But when the day ended successfully, Charlotte had felt more accomplished than she had after months of charity luncheons and social obligations. The next morning brought a crisis that tested every skill they'd developed over the previous weeks. The electrical contractor discovered that the building's main panel was so outdated, it violated current building codes. Everything would have to be rewired from scratch, adding 2 weeks and $15,000 to the project. Charlotte found Marcus standing in the basement, staring at the ancient electrical panel with an expression of controlled frustration. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough that we have to make a choice, Marcus said. We can do the minimal work to pass inspection, which will cost about $8,000, but won't add any value to the building. Or we can upgrade the entire system, which will cost more upfront, but make the property much more attractive to potential tenants. What do you recommend? Upgrade, but it's your decision. Charlotte looked at the maze of old wires and outdated switches. 3 weeks ago, she would have called her mother for guidance, or deferred to whatever Marcus suggested. Now, she found herself thinking through the decision systematically. The insurance company will cover the water damage repairs, she said slowly, but not the electrical upgrade. Right. And the upgrade would make the building more marketable? Significantly. Then we upgrade. Charlotte felt a flutter of nervousness at committing to such an expensive decision, but she trusted her reasoning. I'll call Mother and explain. Marcus looked at her with something that might have been respect. You're sure? I'm sure. The conversation with her mother was more difficult than Charlotte had expected. Evelyn wasn't angry, exactly, but she questioned Charlotte's authority to make such expensive decisions without consultation. I thought you were just observing and learning, Evelyn said, not making major financial commitments. Someone had to decide quickly, Charlotte explained. Marcus recommended the upgrade, and I agreed with his reasoning. Marcus recommended it? Something in her mother's tone set off warning bells in Charlotte's mind. Yes. Why? Nothing, dear. I'm sure his advice is sound. I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly about this project. What does that mean? It means that sometimes we can become emotionally invested in projects and lose sight of practical considerations. Charlotte felt heat rise in her face. My decision was completely practical. Of course it was. I'll transfer the additional funds this afternoon. But after they hung up, Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that her mother had been warning her about more than just financial decisions. That afternoon, while Marcus coordinated the electrical work, Charlotte found herself thinking about the conversation. Was she becoming too emotionally invested? And if so, invested in what? The building project or in Marcus himself? She was still pondering the question when Caleb appeared at the construction site after school. Charlotte had grown used to his occasional visits, and she enjoyed his easy conversation and obvious affection for his brother. Miss Charlotte! Caleb called out as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. Marcus told me about the electrical thing. That's a smart decision. Thank you. Your brother deserves the credit for recommending it. Yeah, but he said you made the call without hesitation. He was impressed. Charlotte felt a warm glow at the second-hand praise. Was he? Definitely. He said you've got good business instincts. Caleb grinned. He also said you're not afraid to get dirty when the work needs doing. The phrase echoed Daniel's comment from the previous evening, but coming from Caleb, it sounded like praise rather than criticism. Where is Marcus now? Charlotte asked. Downstairs with the electrician. They're arguing about circuit placement. Caleb settled onto a sawdust-covered table. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you like my brother? The direct question caught Charlotte off guard. Of course I like him. He's excellent at his job. Caleb gave her a look that was wise beyond his years. That's not what I meant. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm. Caleb, that's complicated. Why? Because he's black and you're white? The blunt question hit Charlotte like a slap. Who told you that? Nobody had to tell me. I'm not blind. Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, but Charlotte could see the intelligence in his eyes. I'm just wondering if that's the only reason it's complicated. Charlotte stared at the teenager, realizing that he'd cut straight through to the heart of something she'd been avoiding thinking about. No, she said finally. That's not the only reason. Good, Caleb said simply. Because Marcus is the best man you'll ever meet. And if you can't see past skin color to figure that out, then you don't deserve him anyway. With that, Caleb hopped down from the table and headed downstairs, leaving Charlotte alone with his words ringing in her ears. That evening, Charlotte sat in her car outside the construction site long after work had ended. Through the windows, she could see the progress they'd made over the past month. The building was beginning to look renewed, purposeful. She thought about Caleb's question and her own carefully honest answer. The racial difference between her and Marcus wasn't the only complication, but she couldn't deny it was a significant one. Her mother's warnings echoed in her mind. The memory of that dinner party comment still made her stomach clench with shame. The way Daniel talked about her getting her hands dirty revealed assumptions she'd never questioned before. But alongside those uncomfortable realizations, Charlotte felt something else. A growing certainty that her feelings for Marcus Reed were real and deep and had nothing to do with rebellion or novelty. She cared about him because of his quiet integrity, his skilled hands, his gentle way of explaining things, his obvious love for his brother. She cared about him because he treated everyone with respect while never compromising his own dignity. She cared about him because somewhere over the past month, working beside him day after day, she'd begun to glimpse the man Caleb saw. Someone worth trusting with your heart. The question was whether she had the courage to act on that realization, knowing it would change everything about her safe, predictable world. As Charlotte finally drove home through the darkening streets, she found herself thinking about trust and courage and the difference between what was comfortable and what was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges to the construction project, but tonight, Charlotte knew that the real construction happening was inside her own heart, as carefully built walls began to crumble and something new took shape in their place. The morning brought Charlotte to the construction site earlier than usual. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with thoughts of Caleb's directness and her own growing feelings. The November air was crisp, and she could see her breath as she unlocked the building's front door. Inside, the familiar smell of sawdust and fresh paint greeted her. The electrical upgrade was nearly complete, and the building hummed with purposeful activity even when empty. Charlotte climbed to the second floor and stood at the large window where she'd first noticed Marcus's enthusiasm for the project. She was still standing there when she heard his truck pull up outside. Through the window, she watched him gather his briefcase and thermos, moving with his usual calm efficiency. Her heart picked up its pace, the way it had been doing for weeks whenever he appeared. "You're here early," Marcus said as he climbed the stairs to join her. "Couldn't sleep." Charlotte turned from the window to face him. "Too much thinking." Something in her tone must have caught his attention, because Marcus set down his briefcase and looked at her more carefully. "Everything all right?" Charlotte took a breath, summoning courage she wasn't sure she possessed. "Caleb asked me some pointed questions yesterday." "About what?" "About whether I like you." Charlotte felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to continue. "And about whether race is the reason things are complicated between us." Marcus went very still. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that wasn't the only reason." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. "Marcus, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "What I said at that dinner party was thoughtless and hurtful. But it wasn't the whole truth about who I am, even though I understand why you might think it was." Charlotte's hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together. "These past weeks, working with you, watching how you handle problems and treat people, I've learned something about myself." Marcus waited, his dark eyes steady on her face. "I've learned that I care about you. Not because you're different from what I'm used to, and not because I'm trying to prove something to myself or anyone else. I care about you because you're kind and skilled and honest. Because you're raising your brother with such love and dedication, because you see problems as puzzles to solve rather than reasons to give up. Charlotte's voice grew stronger as she continued. I care about you because when you explain something, you make me feel capable instead of foolish. Because you work with your hands and take pride in doing things right. Because you've never once made me feel small, even after hearing me say something that must have hurt. Marcus's expression had shifted, the careful professional mask slipping to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. I don't know what any of this means for us, Charlotte continued. I know there are complications I haven't even begun to think through. But I needed you to know that my feelings are real, and they're not about rebellion or curiosity or anything else except who you are as a person. She stopped talking and waited, her heart pounding so hard, she wondered if Marcus could hear it in the quiet building. Marcus was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to read something written there. Charlotte, he said finally, her first name sounding different in his voice. I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. All right. If we were to try this, whatever this is, could you handle the looks, the comments, the questions about what you're doing with someone like me? The question hit Charlotte like cold water. She thought about her mother's warnings, Daniel's assumptions, the dinner party guests who had laughed nervously at her casual prejudice. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'd like to find out. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that Charlotte could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I've been fighting my feelings for you since the day we met, he said quietly. Even after what you said that first night, even knowing all the reasons it would be complicated, but I can't pretend anymore that this is just professional. Relief and joy flooded through Charlotte's chest. So what do? We start slow. We see how it feels, and we're honest with each other about the hard parts. Marcus reached out and touched her cheek gently, his thumb brushing across her skin. Charlotte felt herself lean into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, Marcus was looking at her with an expression of cautious hope mixed with something deeper. Can I kiss you? He asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Charlotte rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and questioning. But when Charlotte's hands found the front of Marcus's jacket and pulled him closer, something shifted between them. The kiss deepened, months of suppressed attraction and growing emotional connection, finding expression in the simple touch of lips and breath. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. That was, Charlotte began. Worth waiting for, Marcus finished. They stood close together in the morning light streaming through the windows, and Charlotte felt something settle into place inside her chest. Something that felt like coming home. The sound of trucks pulling up outside broke the spell. The contractors were arriving for another day of work. We should probably, Marcus gestured toward the stairs. Right. Work. But as they gathered their things and prepared to face the day's tasks, Charlotte felt different, lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't realized was there until it was gone. The next few days passed in a haze of stolen moments and careful normalcy. To the contractors and inspectors, Charlotte and Marcus maintained their professional dynamic. But during lunch breaks and evening reviews, they found excuses to stand closer, to let their hands brush as they passed papers back and forth. Charlotte had never experienced anything like the giddy awareness that hummed through her when Marcus was near. Every shared smile felt significant. Every casual touch sent electricity up her arm. But the real test came that Friday evening when Charlotte's phone rang during dinner. Daniel, she said, seeing his name on the caller ID. Hi. Charlotte, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, about you spending so much time on this construction project. Charlotte felt her stomach tighten. What about it? I think you should step back and let the supervisor handle things from here. You've learned what you wanted to learn, and now it's time to focus on more important things. Such as? Such as us. Such as planning a future together. Daniel's voice took on a more intimate tone. I've been patient, Charlotte, but I'm ready to get serious. I think you are too. Charlotte looked across the dining room at her mother, who was pretending to read, but clearly listening to every word. Daniel, I care about you, but... But what? We're perfect for each other. Everyone says so. The phrase hit Charlotte like a revelation. Everyone says so. All her life, she'd made decisions based on what everyone said, what everyone expected, what everyone would approve of. That's not enough, she said quietly. What? I said that's not enough. What everyone says isn't enough to build a relationship on. Daniel's voice sharpened. Charlotte, where is this coming from? Has someone been putting ideas in your head? The question sparked anger in Charlotte's chest. No one puts ideas in my head, Daniel. I'm perfectly capable of thinking for myself. Of course you are. I just meant, this isn't like you. Maybe it is like me. Maybe you just never bothered to find out. The conversation ended badly, with Daniel confused and hurt, and Charlotte feeling shaky but resolved. Evelyn looked up from her magazine as Charlotte hung up. Everything all right, dear? Fine. That didn't sound fine. Charlotte met her mother's gaze directly. Daniel and I aren't going to work out. Evelyn set down her magazine. May I ask why? Because we want different things. Because he doesn't really see me, just some idea of who he thinks I should be. And what do you want? The question hung in the air between them. Charlotte thought about Marcus's calloused hands and careful explanations. About Caleb's proud smile and easy affection. About the satisfaction of solving real problems and seeing tangible results from hard work. I want someone who sees me as I actually am, Charlotte said. Someone who challenges me to be better without trying to change who I am. Evelyn studied her daughter's face for a long moment. Charlotte, I hope you're not making decisions based on some romantic fantasy about a life that's different from your own. The words were spoken gently, but Charlotte heard the warning underneath. I'm making decisions based on what makes me happy, Charlotte replied. What makes me feel like myself. That weekend, Charlotte found herself at the construction site on Saturday afternoon, even though no work was scheduled. She sat on the front steps in the autumn sunshine, thinking about choices and consequences. Marcus's truck pulled up while she was lost in thought. I thought I might find you here, he said, walking over to sit beside her on the steps. How did you know? Lucky guess. Marcus studied her face. You look like someone who's been having difficult conversations. A few. Charlotte told him about the call with Daniel, about her mother's warnings, about the growing sense that her comfortable world was shifting around her. Marcus listened without interrupting, his presence steady and reassuring. Are you having second thoughts? He asked when she finished. About Daniel? No, about everything else. Charlotte shrugged. Maybe. This is scary, Marcus. Choosing you means choosing to disappoint people I care about. And choosing me might mean disappointment in other ways too, Marcus said honestly. I can't give you the kind of life Daniel could. I'm not from your world, Charlotte. I don't know the rules or the expectations. Good, Charlotte said, surprising them both. I'm tired of rules and expectations. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all day. You say that now, but when people start talking, Let them talk. Charlotte turned to face him fully. Marcus, I've spent my whole life being what other people wanted me to be. For the first time, I know what I want for myself. And what I want is you. The words hung between them, simple and honest and terrifying in their certainty. Marcus reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together. Then we'll figure it out as we go. They sat on the steps in the fading afternoon light, hands clasped, both knowing that the easy part was over. The real work of building something together was just beginning, but as Charlotte looked at their intertwined fingers, his dark skin against her pale skin, his calloused palm against her softer one, she felt a deep sense of rightness that had nothing to do with what anyone else might say or think. 6 weeks later, the downtown property renovation was complete. Charlotte stood in the transformed space, amazed by what they'd accomplished together. Sunlight streamed through clean windows onto gleaming hardwood floors. The exposed brick walls had been carefully restored, and new lighting highlighted the building's historic character. "It's beautiful," she said to Marcus, who was doing a final walkthrough with his clipboard. "It turned out better than I hoped." Marcus made a note about touch-up paint in the stairwell. "Your father would be proud." Charlotte felt a warm glow at the words. The project had given her something she hadn't expected, a connection to her father's memory that felt authentic rather than obligatory. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we start looking for tenants. With any luck, we'll have this place fully leased within 3 months. "I meant with us." Marcus set down his clipboard and turned to face her. "What do you want to happen with us?" Over the past month and a half, their relationship had deepened gradually and naturally. They'd shared quiet dinners, long conversations, and stolen kisses in empty buildings. They'd weathered disapproving looks from some of Charlotte's friends and curious questions from Marcus's coworkers. Charlotte had met the challenge of those looks and questions with growing confidence, discovering that her feelings for Marcus were stronger than her need for social approval. "I want this to be real," Charlotte said. "Not hidden, not temporary. Real." Marcus stepped closer and took her hands in his. "Even if it means more difficult conversations with your mother? More awkward moments at social events?" "Especially then." Charlotte smiled. "Besides, Caleb threatened to disown you if you let me get away." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space. "He's pretty fond of you." "The feeling is mutual." They stood together in the building they'd restored, surrounded by the evidence of what they could accomplish as partners. Charlotte thought about all the assumptions she'd questioned, all the comfortable certainties she'd abandoned, all the fears she'd faced. "No regrets?" Marcus asked, as if reading her thoughts. "None," Charlotte said, and meant it completely. Marcus leaned down and kissed her, soft and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, Charlotte felt that same sense of coming home she'd experienced that first morning when she'd finally told him how she felt. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I love you too," Marcus replied, his voice warm with certainty. Outside, the city continued its daily rhythm. But inside the restored building, two people who'd found each other across difference and doubt stood together in the afternoon light, ready to build something lasting. 3 months later, Charlotte and Marcus hosted a celebration dinner at the estate. The downtown property had been fully leased, a trendy restaurant on the ground floor, and small apartments upstairs that rented within days of being advertised. Caleb was there, proudly wearing his acceptance letter from State University, where he'd received a partial academic scholarship. Rosa bustled around the dining room, beaming with pride at the success of her project. Even Evelyn had warmed to the relationship, slowly coming to appreciate Marcus's steady influence on her daughter and his obvious devotion to family. A toast, Charlotte said, raising her wineglass as the small group gathered around the same dining room table where she'd once made such a thoughtless, hurtful comment. To second chances? She continued, meeting Marcus's eyes across the table. To the courage to change, and to love that grows stronger when it's chosen consciously, every day. Marcus smiled and raised his glass in return. To partnership, he added, in business and in life. As glasses clinked around the table, Charlotte felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd learned that real love wasn't about finding someone who fit into your existing life, but about being brave enough to build a new life together. She'd learned that dignity and respect were not gifts to be given, but qualities to be recognized and honored. And she'd learned that the most meaningful changes happened not through grand gestures, but through daily choices to see clearly, speak honestly, and love courageously. Later that evening, as Marcus walked her to the front door, Charlotte felt the quiet satisfaction that came from a life aligned with her deepest values. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for giving me time to figure things out, for seeing who I could become instead of just who I was." Marcus cupped her face gently in his hands. "Thank you for having the courage to become her." Under the porch light of the house where Charlotte had grown up, she kissed the man who had helped her grow into who she was meant to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to choose love over fear, understanding over assumption. But tonight, held in the arms of someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway, Charlotte felt the deep peace that comes from finally, truly coming home to yourself. The end.